At St. Michael's Memorial Hospital in downtown Phoenix, Margaret Maggie Sullivan has spent 15 years as a compassionate elderly care nurse, beloved by patients and staff alike. But beneath her gentle bedside manner and soft-spoken demeanor lies Sarah "Strike" Connor, once the most decorated Force Recon Marine in Afghanistan, whose classified missions and unprecedented combat record remain sealed in Pentagon archives. When members of the Sinaloa Cartel stormed the hospital's intensive care unit at midnight, threatening staff and seeking a witness under protection, they believe they've found an easy target in the silver-haired nurse working the night shift. What these heavily armed men don't realize is they've just made the worst mistake of their lives. They've threatened a facility under the protection of a warrior who spent 20 years perfecting the art of close-quarters combat and tactical warfare. The Arizona summer night hung heavy and still over Phoenix, the city's lights twinkling against the dark silhouette of Camelback Mountain. Inside St. Michael's Memorial Hospital's geriatric ward, Maggie Sullivan moved with practiced efficiency between her patients' rooms, her white sneakers silent on the polished floors. At 63, she carried herself with a straight-backed grace that belied her age, her silver hair neatly styled, her blue scrubs pristine even 12 hours into her shift. "Time for your evening meds, Mr. Rodriguez," she said softly, entering room 412, where her favorite patient, an 84-year-old former high school teacher, lay watching late-night television. "Ah, Nurse Maggie, you're an angel," Rodriguez smiled, accepting the paper cup of pills. "These young nurses, they rush in and out, but you always have time for a moment's conversation." Maggie adjusted his pillows with practiced hands that bore calluses not from nursing work, but from decades of weapons training, though none of her patients would ever know that. "Teaching for 40 years, you must have some wonderful stories. Tell me about your favorite class while I check your vitals." As she listened to Rodriguez reminisce about teaching Shakespeare to generations of students, Maggie's trained senses remained alert to her surroundings. The quiet beeping of monitors, the squeak of shoes in the hallway, the subtle changes in air pressure as doors opened and closed. Old habits died hard, even after 15 years of civilian life. A soft knock at the door interrupted Rodriguez's story. Jenny Chen, a young ER nurse, stood in the doorway, her expression tense. "Maggie, can I borrow you for a moment? We need a consult in ICU." Maggie recognized the subtle stress patterns in Jenny's voice. Something was wrong. "Of course, Mr. Rodriguez. I'll check back before my shift ends. Don't forget to finish those fluids." In the hallway, Jenny spoke in hurried whispers. "Police brought in a shooting victim an hour ago. Mexican national, mid-20s. They're keeping it quiet, but word is he's a cartel defector willing to testify. 2 officers on guard, but administration's nervous. Dr. Patel asked for you specifically." Maggie's mind instantly shifted into tactical assessment mode. A high-risk witness meant potential for violence, civilian casualties, complex terrain. The hospital's layout flashed through her memory. Entry points, evacuation routes, choke points she'd mentally mapped years ago out of habit. "Any unusual activity around the perimeter?" she asked, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded elite Marine units. Jenny blinked, surprised by the shift in Maggie's demeanor. Security reported a few unmarked vehicles circling the parking structure, but nothing confirmed. "Who else knows about the witness?" "Just senior staff and security. Dr. Patel wanted your input because of your emergency response experience." The official story was that Maggie had served as a combat medic, close enough to explain her crisis management skills without revealing her true background. They took the service elevator to ICU, Maggie using the ride to center herself. She'd chosen nursing as her second career deliberately, a way to continue serving others while maintaining the hypervigilance that had kept her alive through 4 combat tours. The hospital's familiar rhythms usually soothed her warrior's instincts, but tonight those same instincts were coming alive, warning of impending danger. The ICU's double doors whispered open to reveal Dr. Aisha Patel conferring with 2 uniformed officers outside room 7. The young doctor's usual confident stance was tight with tension. She brightened, seeing Maggie approach. "Thank you for coming. We could use your expertise with this situation." Dr. Patel led them into an empty treatment room, closing the door before speaking. "Our patient, Marco Ortiz, took 2 bullets but is stable. He's asking for witness protection. Claims he has evidence about cartel operations in Phoenix, shipping routes, corrupt officials, distribution networks. Police are verifying his claims, but if he's legitimate, we can expect company." Maggie finished. Her mind was already running scenario assessments, identifying defensive positions, calculating response times. How long until he can be moved? At least 48 hours. He lost a lot of blood, and we're watching for infection. I know this puts the hospital at risk, but protecting patients is our job, Maggie said firmly. We just need to be prepared. Jenny, who's staffing ICU tonight? 3 nurses, including me, 2 patient care techs, Dr. Reynolds on call, 8 patients total. Maggie nodded, formulating initial safety protocols. Move any mobile patients to lower floors. Consolidate critical cases near the nurses' station for easier monitoring. I'll coordinate with security on... A subtle change in air pressure made her pause. The ventilation system had shifted, indicating the exterior door at the end of the unit had opened. Standard hospital procedure required staff to use their key. Cards, which wouldn't affect the air handling system. Someone had breached the emergency exit. Lock down the unit, Maggie ordered quietly. Now, Dr. Patel moved to comply. But before she could reach the door, the lights went out, plunging the ICU into darkness broken only by the glow of emergency monitors. In the sudden silence, Maggie heard the distinctive sound of tactical boots on tile, multiple sets moving with military precision. "Get in the supply closet," she whispered to Jenny and Dr. Patel. "Lock the door, stay quiet. Do not come out until you hear the all clear from me personally." "But what about..." Jenny started to protest. "Now," Maggie's voice carried the steel of command, brooking no argument. As the 2 younger women slipped into the closet, Maggie moved silently toward the nurses' station, her mind shifting fully into combat mode. The hospital's backup generators would kick in within minutes, but the intruders were counting on those moments of darkness and confusion. Through the emergency lighting, she counted 5 shadows moving down the corridor. Professional operators by their movement patterns carrying compact automatic weapons. They were heading directly for room 7. The 2 police officers had taken up defensive positions outside Ortiz's room, weapons drawn. But they were patrol officers, not tactical specialists, and they were silhouetted against the emergency lights. Easy targets. "Police, drop your weapons," one officer called out, his voice steady but revealing his lack of experience with this type of situation. The response came in the form of suppressed weapons fire. Both officers went down before they could squeeze off a shot. The precision of the attack confirmed Maggie's assessment. These weren't ordinary cartel thugs, but trained killers. From her position behind the nurses' station, Maggie analyzed her options. She was unarmed outnumbered, and responsible for protecting not just Ortiz, but every patient and staff member in the unit. But she had advantages the intruders couldn't suspect. Intimate knowledge of the environment, decades of close-quarters combat experience, and the element of surprise. No one would expect an elderly nurse to be a threat. The cartel team split up, 3 men moving to secure Ortiz, 2 hanging back to watch the approaches. Their tactical discipline suggested military or special operations. Background: likely former Mexican special forces hired by the cartel. Maggie moved silently through the darkness, circling behind the rear guards. Her muscles remembered the techniques that had made her legendary in Force Recon. The silent takedowns, the efficient neutralization of superior forces, the ability to turn any environment into a weapon. The first guard died silently, his neck broken before he realized anyone was behind him. Maggie caught his weapon before it could clatter to the floor, immediately putting it to use. 2 precisely aimed shots dropped the second guard before he could radio a warning. The sound of suppressed gunfire would draw the others back. Maggie used the moments before their return to improvise. The ICU's medical equipment provided materials that, in trained hands, could become deadly weapons. She worked quickly, setting up killing zones and preparing surprises for her opponents. As the backup generators hummed to life and the main lights flickered on, Maggie Sullivan completed her transformation. The gentle nurse vanished entirely, replaced by Strike Connor, the Marine Corps' most lethal close-quarters combat specialist. She had spent 15 years healing the sick and comforting the dying, but tonight she would become what she had been trained to be, a warrior protecting the innocent from those who would do them harm. The 3 remaining cartel gunmen were about to learn that they had made a fatal mistake. They had brought violence into her hospital, threatened her patients, killed good men doing their duty. Now they would face something far more dangerous than they had expected to find in a Phoenix hospital at midnight. A Force Recon Marine who had never truly left the fight. The hunt was about to begin. The backup generators bathed the ICU in harsh fluorescent light, revealing the full impact of the cartel team's initial assault. The 2 police officers lay motionless by room 7, their weapons still holstered, professionals caught off guard by superior tactical expertise. Blood spread slowly across the polished floor, a stark reminder of what was at stake. From her position behind an equipment cart, Maggie observed the 3 remaining operators regrouping after securing Ortiz. Their leader, a tall man with a distinctive scar along his jaw, directed his team with hand signals that Maggie recognized from her own special operations training. They were preparing for room-by-room clearance, expecting resistance from hospital security or local law enforcement. What they weren't expecting was an opponent who could read their tactics like a book. The ICU's layout, so familiar after years of night shifts, now became a tactical advantage. Maggie knew every corner, every access point, every potential choke point. More importantly, she knew where the most vulnerable patients were located and which areas had to be protected at all. Costs. The neonatal intensive care unit lay just 1 floor below, filled with premature infants in delicate incubation units. Any firefight that compromised that floor could cost tiny, innocent lives. The cardiac ward above housed dozens of patients dependent on sensitive electronic equipment. Maggie couldn't risk a protracted engagement that might endanger either area. This had to be ended quickly and decisively. The cartel team's leader spoke quietly into a radio, his Spanish clear enough for Maggie to understand. Primary target secured. Proceeding with terminal phase. Send cleanup team for evidence removal. Terminal phase. They weren't planning to just eliminate Ortiz. They intended to eliminate all witnesses, including hospital staff. The realization sent ice through Maggie's veins, but her hands remained steady on the captured weapon as she formulated her response. The operators began their methodical sweep, moving with the coordinated precision of men who had done this many times before. They checked each room systematically, their modified MP5s equipped with suppressors to maintain some measure of stealth despite the close quarters. Maggie used their own thoroughness against them. As they cleared the first room, she slipped behind their position, utilizing the skills that had earned her the call sign, Strike. The ability to move like a ghost through any battlefield, appearing seemingly from nowhere to eliminate high-value targets. The rear guard never saw what hit him. Maggie's improvised garrote, fashioned from surgical tubing, ended his threat silently and efficiently. She eased his body into an empty room, acquiring his radio and spare magazines. The weight of the tactical gear felt familiar in her hands, muscle memory from countless operations rushing back. "Carlos, status check!" The team leader's voice crackled over the radio. Maggie remained silent, knowing they would investigate the lack of response. Sure enough, the leader dispatched his remaining man to backtrack and locate their missing teammate. It was exactly what she had anticipated. The ICU's medication room provided her next opportunity. As the second operator passed, Maggie triggered the trap she had prepared. A pressurized canister of medical gas, its safety valve removed, launched across the corridor with explosive force. The impact caught the man squarely, sending him crashing into a supply cart. Before he could recover, Maggie was on him, her strikes targeting nerve clusters and vital points with surgical precision. "What's happening?" Dr. Patel's whispered voice came from the supply closet. "We heard. Stay inside," Maggie ordered sharply. "Whatever you hear, do not open that door until I give the all clear." Now only the leader remained, but he was the most dangerous. Smart enough to realize something had gone wrong, experienced enough to adapt his tactics accordingly. He took up a defensive position at the nurse's station, using the elevated counter for cover while maintaining clear lines of fire down both corridors. A smart position, Maggie acknowledged. But she had spent countless hours at that same station, knowing every access point, every blind spot, including the maintenance shaft that ran behind it, accessed through a panel in the break room. Moving silently through the narrow service corridor, Maggie recalled a similar situation in Kandahar, clearing a hospital that insurgents had taken over. Then, as now, the protection of innocent lives had been paramount. She had learned to be creative, to use the environment itself as a weapon. The maintenance shaft emerged behind the nurse's station through a ventilation grate. Through the slats, Maggie could see the cartel leader scanning the corridors, his weapon moving in precise arcs. His position prevented her from using the captured MP5 effectively. The sound would draw attention from other floors, and she couldn't risk stray rounds in a hospital setting. This would have to be handled up close and personal. Using her multi-tool, Maggie carefully removed the grate screws. The leader's attention was focused outward, expecting threats from the corridors. The soft sounds of her work were masked by the humming generators and beeping medical equipment. Just as she prepared to make her move, a new complication arose. The elevator at the end of the unit dinged softly, its doors sliding open to reveal two more cartel operators, the cleanup team, arriving right on schedule. Maggie's window of opportunity was closing. Once those reinforcements linked up with their leader, her tactical advantage would be severely compromised. She had to act now. In one fluid motion, Maggie pushed through the great opening, her body moving with the explosive power that had made her legendary in close-quarters combat. Her first strike caught the leader at the base of his skull, disrupting his equilibrium before he could bring his weapon to bear. As he staggered, she stripped the MP5 from his grasp, using its momentum to drive the stock into his solar plexus. The leader was good. He recovered quickly, drawing a combat knife and slashing with practiced skill. But Maggie had spent 20 years mastering the art of close-quarters combat. She flowed around his attacks like water, each movement setting up her next strike. A knee to the floating ribs, an elbow to the throat, a precise strike to the brachial plexus that sent the knife clattering to the floor. The cleanup team spotted the fight and rushed forward, raising their weapons. Maggie used the leader's body as a shield, controlling his movement as she retrieved his fallen knife. The blade felt natural in her grip. She had always excelled at knife work, earning top marks in edge weapons training throughout her career. "Stand down, or we start killing patients," one of the newcomers called out in accented English. "You can't protect them all." He was right. In an extended firefight, innocent people would be caught in the crossfire. But Maggie had no intention of letting it reach that point. With clinical precision, she drove the knife into the leader's femoral artery, the wound deliberately placed to be survivable with immediate medical attention. As his colleagues instinctively moved to assist their fallen commander, Maggie exploded into action. The captured MP5 barked twice, carefully aimed shots that took both men in their weapon arms. Like the leader's wound, the injuries were deliberately non-lethal but immediately incapacitating. In the sudden silence that followed, broken only by the steady beeping of medical monitors, Maggie quickly secured the wounded operators with surgical tape and IV tubing, improvised but effective restraints. She applied a pressure bandage to the leader's leg wound, ensuring he wouldn't bleed. Out before authorities arrived. "Clear!" she called out, signaling Jenny and Dr. Patel that it was safe to emerge. The two women stared in shock at the scene before them. 3 wounded cartel operators securely restrained, 2 more unconscious in side rooms, and their elderly colleague calmly checking vital signs as if this were a routine medical procedure. What? Dr. Patel struggled to find words. "Call hospital security and the police," Maggie directed, her voice carrying the calm authority that had guided countless missions. "Tell them we have multiple armed suspects in custody, officers down, and a secure witness requiring immediate protective detail. Then start triage on the wounded. The leg wound is priority, followed by the shoulder injuries." As her colleagues moved to comply, still visibly processing what they had witnessed, Maggie did a quick check on Ortiz. The witness was unconscious but stable, his monitors showing normal vital signs. The cartel team hadn't had time to carry out their terminal phase. In room 412, Mr. Rodriguez's television droned on, the elderly teacher apparently having slept through the entire incident. Maggie allowed herself a small smile. Some things were better left as peaceful as possible. Jenny approached cautiously, her eyes wide as she took in Maggie's transformed demeanor. Who are you really?" "Someone who took an oath to protect others," Maggie replied simply, beginning to clean and dress the wounds of the men she had just neutralized. "First as a Marine, now as a nurse. The uniform changes, but the duty remains the same." The sound of approaching sirens filled the night air as local law enforcement responded to the hospital's alert. Soon, the ICU would be swarming with police, FBI, and federal marshals. Questions would be asked, reports would be filed, and the comfortable anonymity Maggie had maintained for 15 years would be compromised. But she had protected her patients, her colleagues, and her hospital. The oath she had taken as a Marine and renewed as a nurse had been upheld, and perhaps, she reflected as she continued treating the wounded with professional detachment, it was time to stop hiding who she really was. After all, there might be other nights when St. Michael's Memorial would need the skills of Strike Connor, the Marine who had become their guardian angel in nurses' scrubs. Within minutes, St. Michael's Memorial Hospital's quiet night erupted into controlled chaos. Police units swarmed the building, their flashing lights painting the walls in alternating red and blue. FBI agents arrived shortly after, taking control of the scene with practiced efficiency. Through it all, Maggie continued her rounds, checking on patients and ensuring the night's violence hadn't disturbed their rest. Special Agent Marcus Chen of the FBI's Phoenix field office found her changing IV bags in the cardiac ward. He paused in the doorway, studying the silver-haired nurse with newfound respect. Master Sergeant Sarah Connor, or do you prefer Nurse Sullivan? Maggie is fine, she replied, completing her task before turning to face him. I assume you've accessed my file. What's left of it? Most of your service record is heavily redacted. Force Recon, multiple combat deployments, specialized training in close-quarters combat and tactical medicine. The kind of background that raises questions about why you're working night shifts in a civilian hospital. Maggie recorded the patient's vitals with meticulous care. Sometimes the best way to keep serving is to step back from the fight. At least, that was the plan, until tonight. Chen produced a small notebook. Walk me through what happened, from the beginning. As they moved through the quiet corridors, Maggie provided a detailed briefing, her report crisp and professional, a Marine's precision in a nurse's soft voice. Chen took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about tactics and timing. 5 highly trained operators, all neutralized without fatalities, he observed. Impressive work for anyone, let alone someone 15 years out of active service. You never really leave the Corps, Maggie replied. The training stays with you, becomes part of who you are. Like riding a bicycle, except the bicycle is combat. Tactics and survival skills. They reached the ICU, now transformed into a crime scene. Evidence technicians photographed blood spatter patterns and collected shell casings. The wounded cartel operators had been transferred to a secure medical facility under heavy guard. The leader, Chen consulted his notes, Xavier Ramirez, former Mexican Special Forces contracted by the Sinaloa Cartel for high-risk operations. He's been on our radar for years, but we've never managed to catch him in the act. Until tonight, he was professional, Maggie acknowledged. They all were. This wasn't just about eliminating a witness. They wanted something specific from Ortiz. Chen's expression sharpened. What makes you say that? Their tactics, the precision of the initial, reached the systematic room clearance. They were searching for something before the terminal phase was to begin. I heard Ramirez mention evidence removal in his radio transmission. That tracks with what we're learning about Ortiz. He wasn't just any cartel member looking to flip. He was their chief accountant, responsible for managing their digital financial networks. The kind of person who would have access to sensitive information. The implications were clear. The cartel hadn't just sent a kill team, they had deployed an elite retrieval unit to recover something specific before eliminating all witnesses. Whatever Ortiz knew, it was worth risking a hospital assault to contain. Dr. Patel approached, still looking shaken but maintaining her professional composure. Agent Chen, Mr. Ortiz is awake and asking to speak with federal authorities. I'll need to question him, Chen said. Maggie, would you mind? I'll come with you, she interjected. He's still my patient, and his condition needs monitoring during questioning. Chen nodded agreement. Recognizing the logic of having medical personnel present, they found Ortiz propped up in his hospital bed, his face pale but alert. 2 FBI agents stood guard outside his room, their presence a stark contrast to the fallen police officers from earlier. Mr. Ortiz, Chen began. I'm Special Agent Chen, FBI. This is Nurse Sullivan, who was instrumental in protecting you tonight. We need to understand exactly what the cartel was trying to recover. Ortiz's eyes fixed on Maggie with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. They told me a nurse stopped them. I didn't believe it at first. His English was excellent, carrying only a slight accent. Focus on the information, Mr. Ortiz, Maggie encouraged gently, checking his vital signs as she spoke. What were they looking for? A key. Ortiz's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. A digital encryption key that unlocks their entire financial network. Account numbers, transaction records, connections to legitimate businesses. Everything they need to move billions in drug money through the global banking system. Chen leaned forward. Where is this key now? Hidden, broken into fragments and scattered across different secure servers. I was going to provide the access and codes as part of my cooperation agreement, but now... He glanced nervously at the door. The cartel knows you have this information, Maggie stated. They'll keep coming. Not just the cartel. Ortiz's hands twisted in the hospital sheets. There are others, people in banks, in government positions, in law enforcement, people who can't afford to have their connections exposed. They'll send worse than Ramirez next. A time. Maggie recognized the fear in his voice. She'd heard it before, from witnesses and informants who understood the true scope of what they faced. This wasn't just about drug money anymore. It was about the entire corrupt infrastructure that facilitated international criminal operations. We need to move him, she told Chen. This facility isn't equipped for this level of security risk, especially now that they know he's here. Agreed. We're arranging transfer to a secure medical facility, but it will take time to set up proper protocols. Time we may not have, Maggie countered. They breached this unit once. They'll try again with better intelligence and greater force. As if to emphasize her point, the hospital's lights flickered momentarily. Maggie's combat instincts immediately registered the implications. Someone was accessing the building's power systems. Get on your radio, she ordered Chen. Check if other sections of the hospital are experiencing power fluctuations. Chen complied, his expression growing grave as he received responses. Multiple systems showing irregularities. Security cameras in the East Wing just went dark. They're testing our defenses, Maggie concluded, probing for weaknesses before launching another assault. Standard tactical procedure when the first attempt fails. Through the window, she spotted movement on the rooftop of an adjacent medical office building. Just a shadow, there and gone, but enough to confirm her suspicions. The cartel had already positioned a second team. How long until transport is ready? She asked Chen. Minimum 2 hours to arrange secure medical transport and proper escort. We don't have 2 hours. Maggie's mind raced through options, evaluating and discarding scenarios with military precision. We need to assume they have someone inside the hospital, probably in a legitimate position. That's how they got the building schematics for the first assault. You think we have a leak in hospital security or maintenance? or administration. Someone with access to system layouts and security protocols. She turned to Ortiz. Can you be moved? Short distance, in a wheelchair. The accountant nodded. I'm weak, but mobile. Where would we go? Somewhere they won't expect. Maggie outlined her plan quickly. This unit is compromised. They know the layout, the security positions, everything, but I've worked every floor of this hospital. I know places that don't appear on any official schematic. Chen looked skeptical. You want to hide him somewhere inside the building? That's incredibly risky. Less risky than staying here waiting for their next assault. Sometimes the best defensive position is one that doesn't officially exist. A series of sharp pops echoed from somewhere in the distance. Transformers being disabled systematically. The Cartel team was methodically isolating sections of the hospital's power grid. Make the call, Maggie urged Chen. Trust me or don't. But decide quickly. The FBI agent studied her for a long moment, weighing the risks against her combat experience. Finally, he nodded. Do it, but I'm coming with you. Fine. Get him disconnected from the monitors. I need 3 minutes to gather. Supplies. Maggie moved quickly through the unit, collecting essential medical equipment and medications. Her mind was already mapping routes through the hospital's lesser-known passages, service corridors, maintenance tunnels, abandoned sections from previous renovations, places she had catalogued over years of night shifts, driven by ingrained tactical awareness that never fully subsided. Tonight, those hidden spaces would become their fortress. And if the cartel wanted their accountant back, they would have to go through a Force Recon Marine who had turned an entire hospital into her killing ground. Maggie moved swiftly through the ICU, gathering critical supplies with practiced efficiency. Her hands selected medications and equipment automatically, while her mind mapped their escape route through the hospital's hidden infrastructure. Years of night shifts had given her intimate knowledge of the building's secrets, ancient service corridors sealed during renovations, mechanical spaces unknown even to current maintenance staff, and forgotten storage areas that didn't appear on modern blueprints. We need to move quickly, she told Chen as she packed a portable medical kit. Their next assault will be more sophisticated. They'll have studied the security footage from the first attempt, analyzed their mistakes, identified new entry points. Through the windows, she caught glimpses of tactical movement on nearby rooftops, shadows shifting with military precision. The cartel's second team was getting into position, establishing firing lines and escape routes with professional thoroughness. How many do you estimate? Chen asked, helping Ortiz into a wheelchair while maintaining his weapon ready. At least 8, probably more positioned around the perimeter. Mixed weapons loadout based on what I'm seeing. They're preparing for a sustained operation this time. Maggie's assessment was automatic, combat instincts reading tactical patterns in the darkness. Dr. Patel approached with Ortiz's medical charts. His latest blood work shows improving numbers, but he's still at risk for infection. Where are you taking him? Better if you don't know, Maggie replied. Get your staff to lower floors, away from potential lines of fire. If anyone asks, you were evacuated by federal agents. Technical truth, but misdirection. More transformers popped in the distance as the cartel team continued isolating sections of the hospital's power grid. Soon they would cut main power entirely, forcing systems onto backup generators with limited capacity. Standard siege tactics degrade infrastructure before assault. Time to move, Maggie announced, securing the medical kit to the wheelchair. Chen, you're on rear security. Watch our 6, but stay close. I'll take point. They moved into the corridor just as the main lights failed, plunging the unit into emergency lighting. Maggie led them away from obvious evacuation routes, instead turning down a service hallway marked "Maintenance Only." At its end stood a heavy metal door with a keypad lock. "They'll have access to current security codes," Chen pointed out. Maggie smiled slightly. This system was installed in 1987, never upgraded because the corridor was officially decommissioned in '95. Old codes still work if you know them. Her fingers moved across the keypad, muscle memory recalling numbers she had discovered years ago in forgotten maintenance logs. The door opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a narrow passage lit by ancient fluorescent tubes. Pipes and conduits ran along the walls, carrying vital services through the building's skeletal framework. "Service tunnel from the original hospital construction," Maggie explained as they entered. "Most of these were sealed off during modernization, but a few remain active for maintenance access. This one connects to the old boiler room 3 floors down." They descended through the building's hidden arterial network, passing junction boxes and mechanical systems that hummed with the hospital's lifeblood. Maggie navigated the maze with confidence, choosing turns based on mental maps built during countless quiet night shifts. "How did you find these passages?" Chen asked, as they reached a wider section that might once have been a storage area. "I make it my business to know every inch of any facility I'm responsible for protecting," Maggie replied. "Combat habit. Always know your terrain." She paused, head tilted. "Hold position." Above them, boots scuffed on tile. Cartel operators moving through standard search patterns. The old ventilation system carried sounds clearly through the building's infrastructure. Maggie listened intently, counting footsteps and analyzing. "Movement patterns, 2-man teams, systematic sweep," she whispered. "They're assuming we've gone to lower floors, starting top-down search." "Smart protocol," Chen acknowledged. "Standard FBI evacuation procedure would take us to ground level for transport, which is why we're doing something different." Maggie led them through a half-hidden doorway into what appeared to be an abandoned surgical suite, its equipment draped in dust covers. "Welcome to the old operating theater, sealed off in '98 when they built the new surgical wing. Perfect place to treat a patient who officially isn't here." The room was a time capsule of late 20th century medicine, preserved but forgotten. Emergency power still fed basic systems, a legacy of hospital building codes that required multiple redundant circuits. Maggie quickly established a basic monitoring station, connecting Ortiz to portable equipment from their medical kit. "We can hold this position," she said, checking sightlines and potential entry points. "Single access corridor, controlled environment, emergency power, and nobody knows it exists. Even if they hack current building schematics, this won't show." Up, Chen secured the entrance while Maggie got Ortiz settled. The accountant was pale but stable, his vital signs steady despite the stress of movement. She administered medication through his IV, carefully monitoring his response. "They're very thorough, these men, hunting me," Ortiz said quietly. "Military trained, but not regular army. Special operations backgrounds like the first team. The cartels recruit them heavily. Better pay than government service, and they already understand covert operations. Former Special Forces operators turning mercenary." Maggie nodded. "I've seen it before. Skills without loyalty are always for sale." Above them, the sweep teams continued their methodical search. Maggie could track their progress through the old ventilation system, which acted like an acoustic antenna throughout the building's sealed spaces. The cartel operators were being thorough, checking every room, every closet, every potential hiding place. "They'll find the service door eventually," Chen noted. "Even old systems leave traces in building records." "True," Maggie agreed. "But finding the door and successfully breaching our position are very different challenges." She began preparing the room's defenses, her mind already gaming out combat scenarios. The confined space and single approach created a natural bottleneck, advantageous for defenders who knew how to use it. From her medical kit, Maggie produced items that could serve dual purposes. Surgical tubing that could become tripwires, disinfectant sprays that would burn eyes and throats, sealed containers of pressurized gas that could become improvised explosives. She positioned them strategically, creating layers of defensive measures. "You've done this before," Ortiz observed, watching her work. "Turned normal places into fortresses." "Many times, usually in worse conditions than this." Maggie checked her captured weapons magazine. A Force Recon Marine learns to use any environment to tactical advantage. Hospitals actually provide excellent defensive options. Lots of supplies that can be repurposed, complex infrastructure for cover and movement, multiple power and ventilation systems. Chen's radio crackled, FBI teams reporting no sign of Ortiz. In their systematic search of lower floors, the cartel operators would hear the same transmissions, knowing their target wasn't following expected evacuation protocols. They would begin expanding their search parameters, looking for alternative routes and hidden spaces. "How long do you think we can hold this position?" Chen asked. "Long enough," Maggie replied confidently. "Their tactical advantage drops significantly once they enter these old corridors. Modern military training doesn't prepare you for this kind of environment. Abandoned medical spaces, decommissioned infrastructure, irregular architecture. Every piece of outdated equipment becomes potential cover. Every sealed doorway, a potential ambush point." She had positioned herself where she could monitor both the entrance and Ortiz's medical status. Years of combat experience combined with medical training, allowing her to maintain security while ensuring her patient's stability. The corpsman's creed echoed in her memory. "I shall not fail those entrusted to my care." A distant clang reverberated through the ventilation system. Someone had found the maintenance door. Maggie checked her watch, mentally calculating response times and assault patterns. Soon the cartel team would begin probing the service tunnels, trying to track their movement through the building's hidden framework. "They're getting closer," Ortiz said nervously. "Good," Maggie replied, her voice carrying the calm confidence that had steadied countless Marines in combat situations. "Let them come. Every step they take deeper into these passages reduces their tactical options while increasing ours. This is our killing ground now." She settled into position, weapon ready but not tense. The familiar pre-combat calm settled over her, that crystalline clarity of purpose that had served her through decades of special operations. She was no longer just a nurse protecting a patient. She was a Force Recon Marine defending her position, and these corridors would become a tomb for any cartel operator foolish enough to press the assault. The hunt was about to begin again, but this time Maggie had chosen the battlefield. In these forgotten passages beneath St. Michael's Memorial, she would remind them why she had once been the most feared close-quarters combat specialist in the Marine Corps. Let them come. Strike Connor was ready. The abandoned surgical suite lay silent, except for the steady beep of Ortiz's monitoring equipment and the distant sounds of movement through the ventilation system. Maggie tracked the cartel team's progress by sound, noting their systematic search pattern as they worked through the old service tunnels. "2 teams, from what I can hear," she whispered to Chen, "moving parallel through the main passages. Professional spacing, maintaining communications discipline, they're good." "Not good enough, apparently," Chen replied, indicating the defensive measures Maggie had rigged throughout their approach corridor. Every shadow concealed a trap, every doorway a potential ambush point. The first warning trip line, nearly invisible surgical thread stretched at ankle height, triggered a quiet alarm on Maggie's improvised monitoring system. "Contact imminent," she reported calmly. "First team entering our sector." Through the ventilation ducts came the subtle sounds of tactical movement, the soft scuff of combat boots, the whisper of weapons against tactical gear, the barely audible click of radio transmissions. These operators were well trained in stealth operations, but the old hospital infrastructure worked against them, carrying even their quietest movements to Maggie's trained ears. "Northeast corridor," she identified. 2-man team moving slow. "They've spotted signs of our passage." She had deliberately left subtle indicators, scuff marks, disturbed dust, traces that would draw them toward prepared killing zones rather than their actual position. Maggie checked Ortiz's vitals one last time before moving to her primary defensive position. The accountant was stable, his color improving despite the stress. She had positioned his bed behind a barrier of old surgical equipment, providing cover from any stray rounds that might penetrate the corridor. The first cartel operator appeared, at the far end of their approach corridor, just a shadow against shadows, moving with professional caution. His weapons swept methodically across potential threat zones, but he hadn't yet spotted the cleverly concealed defensive positions. Maggie remained perfectly still, controlling her breathing as she had been taught in advanced sniper training. The new operator advanced slowly, his teammate providing coverage from behind. They were using proper tactical spacing, maintaining sight lines while minimizing exposure. The lead operator triggered her first active defense, a pressurized canister of surgical disinfectant modified to create a burning aerosol cloud. He reacted professionally, immediately dropping to one knee and bringing his weapon up while trying to clear his vision. His partner moved to provide cover, exactly as their training would dictate. That's when Maggie's second trap activated. The floor panel beneath the second operator suddenly gave way. Not enough to cause injury, but sufficient to disrupt his balance and break their coordinated defense. In the moment of confusion, Maggie struck. Her first shots took both operators in their weapon arms, precise hits that incapacitated without killing. As they struggled to recover, weighted surgical tubing dropped from ceiling mounts, entangling their movements. Maggie was on them before they could cut free, her close-quarters combat techniques brutally efficient in the confined space. "Clear!" she reported moments later, securing the unconscious operators with improvised restraints. "But the others will have heard that exchange, even suppressed." Chen helped her drag the incapacitated men into their defensive position. "How many more?" "At least 6, based on movement patterns. They'll adjust tactics now, become more aggressive." Standard response. When losing operators during close-quarters battle, as if confirming her assessment, new sounds echoed through the ventilation system. More teams converging on their sector, moving with increased urgency. The cartel operators had switched from search patterns to assault formation. They're coordinating. For a push, Maggie analyzed, listening to their movement. Multiple teams trying to overwhelm our position with superior numbers. She smiled slightly. They still think they're dealing with standard federal protection protocols. Chen checked his ammunition. We're significantly outnumbered. Numbers matter less in these conditions, Maggie replied, already moving to adjust her defenses. Confined spaces, limited approaches, complex terrain, it all favors the defender, especially a defender who knows how to use the environment itself as a weapon. She had spent years memorizing every quirk of the hospital's infrastructure, which panels could be removed to access maintenance spaces, which pipes carried high-pressure steam, which electrical systems could be safely repurposed for tactical advantage. Now all that knowledge would be turned against the Cartel assault team. "Watch our six," she instructed Chen. "They might try to breach from multiple directions. I'll handle the main corridor." As the FBI agent moved to cover their rear approaches, Maggie began implementing the next phase of her defensive strategy. The old surgical suite's medical gas system, though decommissioned, still contained residual pressure in its copper lines. Maggie carefully vented specific sections, creating pockets of oxygen-enriched air in the approach corridor. Not enough to be immediately dangerous, but sufficient to amplify the effects of any explosive discharge. More trip lines appeared across different heights, some obvious enough to make the operators move cautiously, others nearly invisible to catch them when they thought they had identified all the threats. She positioned captured flashbangs from the first team where the confined space would multiply their effectiveness. Through it all, she maintained constant awareness of Ortiz's condition, checking his monitors between defensive preparations. The accountant watched her work with a mixture of fear and fascination. "You've turned this whole section into one giant trap," he observed quietly. "Multiple layers of defense in depth," Maggie corrected. "Each obstacle depletes their resources, breaks their coordination, forces them to adapt to increasingly difficult conditions. By the time they reach our actual position, they'll be disoriented, separated, and vulnerable." The Cartel teams were moving into position now, their coordinated movements suggesting they were preparing for a major push. Maggie could track their deployment through the sounds carried by the old ventilation system, operators taking positions at key junctions, establishing fields of fire, preparing for a synchronized assault. "They're setting up a three-point attack," she reported to Chen. "Standard close-quarters battle doctrine. 2 teams push the main corridor while a third tries to flank through maintenance spaces. Can we hold against that kind of assault?" "We don't have to hold indefinitely," Maggie reminded him. "Just long enough for proper federal response teams to secure the hospital and establish a safe evacuation corridor. How long on that timeline?" Chen checked his radio. 30 minutes. Minimum for tactical teams to deploy and sweep the building. Maybe longer if the Cartel has established exterior counter-surveillance. Then we hold for 30 minutes. Maggie's voice carried absolute conviction. "These passages are my killing ground now. Time to remind them why Force Recon Marines are considered the most lethal close-quarters combat specialists in the world." The first flashbang detonated in the distance, Cartel operators triggering defensive measures as they began their advance. Maggie settled into her primary firing position, her breathing slow and controlled. Years of nursing work had kept her hands steady, her focus sharp. Now those same hands would deliver precision fire instead of medical care. "Remember your training," she whispered to herself, the old Force Recon mantra coming back naturally. "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Control your breathing, control the battle space." The assault was beginning. Through her field of fire, Maggie could see the first operators moving into the corridor, using professional tactics to minimize exposure. They were good, their movements coordinated, their approach methodical. But they were entering a battlefield prepared by someone who had spent decades mastering the art of close-quarters combat. These forgotten passages beneath St. Michael's Memorial were about to become their worst nightmare. The hunter had become the hunted, and a Force Recon Marine was about to give them a lesson in why you should never corner a warrior in their own territory. The real battle was about to begin. The first wave of cartel operators advanced with tactical precision, using overlapping fields of fire to cover their movement through the corridor. Their weapons swept methodically across shadow and light, professional operators expecting resistance but confident in their superior numbers and firepower. The lead man triggered Maggie's initial defensive line, a cascade of precisely positioned flashbangs that detonated in sequence, their effectiveness multiplied by the confined space. Even through their tactical gear, the operators staggered under the assault on their senses. The oxygen-enriched air amplified each concussion, turning the narrow passage into a tunnel of pure chaos. Maggie waited for the exact moment when their coordination broke, then engaged. Her first shots caught the point man in his exposed shoulder, the impact spinning him into his teammate. As they collided, she triggered her next trap, pressurized canisters of surgical disinfectant creating a caustic fog that burned eyes and throats even through protective equipment. "Contact front," one operator managed to call out before Maggie's next series of shots forced them to cover. Their return fire was sporadic, disrupted by the environmental hazard she had created. Each round they fired blindly depleted their ammunition without effect while revealing their positions. Through her improvised monitoring system, Maggie tracked the flanking team's progress through maintenance spaces. They were trying to be quiet, but the old hospital infrastructure betrayed their movement with every step. She keyed her radio briefly. "Chen, 3 targets moving through the east maintenance shaft. They'll breach near your position in approximately 30 seconds. Copy that," the FBI agent replied tersely. She had positioned him where the flanking team would emerge directly into his prepared kill zone. Sure enough, moments later, the sharp crack of gunfire indicated Chen had engaged the flanking element. The main corridor had become a nightmare of smoke, noise, and cascading traps. Every step forward cost the cartel operators dearly in equipment and coordination. Flashbangs detonated at irregular intervals, destroying their night vision. Trip lines entangled their movements. Improvised smoke bombs created shifting zones of zero visibility. "They're trying to pull back," Chen reported after neutralizing the flanking team, regrouping for another push. "Let them," Maggie replied calmly. "Each retreat depletes their resources and morale, while our position stays strong." She checked Ortiz's vitals quickly, still stable despite the chaos around him. The accountant watched the battle with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "I've seen military operations before," he said quietly, "but nothing like this." "Force Recon specializes in unconventional warfare," Maggie explained while reloading her weapon. "Converting any environment into a tactical advantage, using enemy strength against them. These operators are trained for direct assault. I'm giving them something their tactical doctrine doesn't prepare them for." New sounds echoed through the ventilation system. The cartel teams were repositioning, trying to find alternate approaches to their position. Maggie had anticipated this, preparing secondary defensive layers that would channel their movement into predictable patterns. "They're adapting," she noted with professional appreciation, switching to smaller teams, probing for weak points. Smart tactics against a fixed defensive position. She smiled slightly. Unfortunately for them, this isn't a fixed position. Using access panels she had identified during her years of night shifts, Maggie could move through the walls themselves, appearing seemingly at will to engage the cartel teams from unexpected angles. The old hospital's infrastructure became her personal highway system, allowing her to outmaneuver numerically superior forces. A burst of gunfire erupted from the western approach, a two-man team trying to breach through a maintenance access. In point, Maggie was already moving, using her intimate knowledge of the service passages to flank their position. Her first shot took the rear operator in his weapon arm. As his partner turned to respond, she was already gone, disappearing into the maze of access tunnels. "How long have you known about these passages?" Chen asked during a brief lull, clearly impressed by her mobility through the sealed spaces. "Started mapping them my first year here," Maggie replied, checking her ammunition. "Quiet night shifts give you time to explore. Most of these routes were sealed off during renovations, forgotten by everyone, except a few old maintenance workers. I've made it my business to learn every inch of this building's infrastructure." Through her monitoring system, she tracked the cartel teams regrouping again. Their numbers had been reduced by nearly half, some wounded, others trapped by her defensive measures. The survivors were adjusting tactics, becoming more cautious in their approach. "They're pulling back to defensive positions," she analyzed. "Waiting for reinforcements, probably. Standard protocol when an assault fails against an unknown defensive capability." She checked her watch. "How long until tactical response teams secure the building?" 15 minutes, Chen reported. "They're moving floor by floor, securing each section before advancing." "Good. We just need to hold this position a little longer." Maggie moved to check on Ortiz again, administering medication. Through his IV, "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected," the accountant managed a weak smile. "Watching you work, it's like seeing a master tactician in their element." "They never had a chance, did they?" "They had every advantage on paper," Maggie corrected. "Numbers, equipment, tactical training. What they lacked was understanding of the environment and the will to use it effectively." She paused, listening to movement in the ventilation system. "They're coming again. Different approach this time." The cartel operators had switched to single-team infiltration attempts, trying to minimize their exposure to her traps and ambush positions. It was a solid tactical adjustment, but one Maggie had prepared for. Each approach to their position was rigged with multiple layers of defensive measures, each designed to separate and disorient attacking forces. A new sound caught her attention. Someone accessing the electrical systems that powered the old surgical suite. The cartel teams were trying to cut their power, probably hoping to disable Ortiz's medical equipment and force them to move. "Nice try," Maggie murmured, switching their systems to the battery backup she had prepared. "But I've spent too many nights keeping critical patients alive during power failures. Always have redundant systems." The battle had settled into a rhythm. Now, probe and counter-probe, attack and defense, each side adapting to the other's tactics. But Maggie held the ultimate advantage. This was her territory, shaped by years of careful observation and preparation. Every shadow concealed a trap, every passage a potential ambush point. Through it all, she maintained her professional calm, the steady hands of a nurse combined with the lethal precision of a Marine. Each engagement was calculated, each shot placed with surgical accuracy to wound rather than kill. These men were professionals doing a job, and she respected that. But they had brought violence into her hospital, threatened her patients, and that could not be allowed to stand. Movement. In the North Corridor, Chen reported suddenly. Multiple contacts, different tactical pattern. Maggie checked her monitoring system. The new teams were moving with different protocol indeed, disciplined but not aggressive, maintaining strict fire control and communications security. Federal Tactical Response Teams, she identified. There, sweeping the building systematically. Cartel operators will detect them soon, be forced to withdraw, or risk direct engagement with superior forces. Sure enough, the sounds of cartel teams repositioning echoed through the ventilation system. They were pulling back, abandoning their assault positions in favor of emergency exfiltration routes. Professional operators knew when a mission had become untenable. All units, this is FBI Tactical Command. A new voice crackled over Chen's radio. Building is being secured floor by floor. Report any contact with hostile forces. Chen responded with their location and situation. Within minutes, the first federal tactical team reached their position, moving with practiced efficiency through Maggie's defensive measures. They found her calmly tending to Ortiz's medical needs, her weapon readily accessible but not prominent. The tactical team leader, a veteran FBI operator, surveyed the corridor leading to their position. The spent, flashbangs, the triggered trip lines, the signs of precise defensive fire. His expression showed professional appreciation. "You did all this?" he asked Maggie. "The environment did most of it," she replied modestly. "I just helped it along. Is the building secure?" Upper floors cleared, no sign of remaining hostile forces. "They bugged out when our team started sweeping, must have had pre-planned escape routes." He studied her with newfound respect. "You held this position against a professional assault team with just 2 operators. That's impressive work." Maggie simply nodded, already focusing on preparing Ortiz for evacuation. The immediate threat had passed, but her job wasn't done until her patient was safely transferred to a secure medical facility. After that, there would be debriefings, reports, probably some awkward conversations about why a night shift nurse was so skilled in tactical warfare. But for now, she allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. She had protected her patient, defended her hospital, and reminded some very professional operators why Force Recon Marines were considered the masters of close-quarters combat. Not bad for an elderly nurse working the night shift. The night's excitement was ending, but somehow Maggie suspected her quiet retirement had just become a lot more interesting. After all, word would spread about what happened at St. Michael's Memorial, about the cartel operators who made the mistake of threatening a hospital protected by Strike Connor. They would think twice before trying that again. The aftermath of the battle brought a new kind of chaos to St. Michael's Memorial. FBI tactical teams secured the building floor by floor, while evidence technicians documented the scene in the old service tunnels. Every triggered trap, every sign of engagement, every spent casing told part of the story of how one nurse had turned forgotten hospital passages into a defensive stronghold. Maggie focused on her immediate priorities, preparing Ortiz for transfer to a secure medical facility. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking IV lines and monitoring equipment while maintaining situational awareness. Years of combat experience had taught her that the aftermath of an engagement could be just as dangerous as the battle itself. Special Agent Marcus Chen coordinated with the tactical response teams, establishing a secure perimeter around their position. "Transport will be here in 10 minutes, he reported. "Full tactical escort to a federal medical facility. How's he doing?" "Stable enough for movement," Maggie replied, administering a precautionary dose of antibiotics. The stress elevated his blood pressure, but his wound sites are clean and showing no signs of infection. Through the open doorway, she could hear the tactical teams sweeping adjacent corridors, their movements disciplined and methodical. They occasionally paused to examine her defensive preparations, their comments carrying tones of professional respect. "Ma'am, FBI Tactical would like your assistance documenting the defensive measures," a young agent approached. "Some of these setups are unlike anything we've encountered. First, help me prep my patient for transport," Maggie replied firmly. "The scene documentation can wait. Mr. Ortiz's security and medical stability take priority." The agent nodded, chastened by her professional focus. Together, they prepared Ortiz for movement, securing his monitors and IV lines for transit. The accountant remained remarkably calm despite the continued activity around him. "You never stopped being a nurse," Ortiz observed quietly. "Even in the middle of combat, you kept checking on me, adjusting medications, monitoring vitals." "The mission doesn't change," Maggie responded, securing his transport wheelchair. "Whether it's defending a position or caring for patients, you focus on the essential tasks. In Force Recon, we learned to maintain multiple priorities under fire." Dr. Patel arrived with the hospital administrator, both looking somewhat shell-shocked as they surveyed the scene. The administrator, David Morton, seemed particularly stunned by the revelation that part of his hospital had become a battleground. "Nurse Sullivan," he began uncertainly, We had no idea about your background. The references we checked were completely accurate," Maggie finished for him. 20 years of military service, including medical training. Everything in my file is true, just not the complete story." She continued preparing Ortiz for transport while speaking. "The hospital's insurance will cover any damage to the old surgical suite. Most of the defensive measures can be removed without structural impact." Morton blinked, clearly struggling to reconcile the efficient, compassionate nurse he'd known for years with the tactical operator who had just repelled a cartel assault team. "The FBI wants to interview all staff members who were present tonight. Standard procedure for a mass casualty incident involving organized crime." Maggie nodded. "I'll provide a full report after my patient is secured." "Dr. Patel, would you mind checking his wound sites before transport? Fresh eyes are always valuable." The young doctor moved forward automatically, medical training taking over despite the unusual circumstances. She examined Ortiz's injuries with professional thoroughness while Maggie continued transport preparations. "The hospital board will want to speak with you," Morton added, still trying to process the situation. "There are protocols for staff members. With military backgrounds, security considerations." "With respect, sir," Maggie interrupted gently, "those discussions can wait. Right now, we have a critical patient requiring secure transport, a crime scene needing documentation, and staff members who need support processing tonight's events. Let's focus on immediate priorities." Her calm professionalism seemed to steady the administrator. He nodded, visibly gathering himself. "Of course. What do you need from administration?" "Arrange counseling services for any staff members who were present during the initial assault. Review security protocols for all departments, particularly regarding visitor access and identification verification, and perhaps consider updating the old building schematics. Some of these service tunnels should be properly documented. Chen approached with an update from the tactical teams. Building is secure. No sign of remaining hostile forces. They executed a professional withdrawal when our teams arrived. Multiple exit routes, covered retreat, no evidence left behind beyond spent ammunition. They'll analyze this engagement carefully, Maggie noted. Adjust tactics for future operations. Professional operators learn from their failures. She finished securing Ortiz's IV lines. We should expect them to try again, probably with different methodology. Let them try, Chen replied grimly. Next time they'll face proper federal tactical response, not just two operators in an abandoned surgical suite. Don't underestimate them, Maggie warned. They adapted quickly tonight, showed good tactical flexibility. Their next attempt will be better planned, better executed. They'll study everything we did and develop counters. A commotion at the entrance drew their attention. A federal tactical response team was arriving with transport equipment, specialized medical gear designed for secure patient movement. Their leader, a squared-away operator in full tactical gear, approached Maggie directly. "Master Sergeant Connor?" he asked, showing recognition. "Captain Mike Reynolds, FBI Tactical. I was Force Recon 2, served just after you. Your close quarters combat protocols were still required reading when I went through training." Maggie acknowledged him professionally, noting his excellent tactical positioning even during casual conversation. "Good to meet you, Captain. I assume you're handling transport security?" "Yes, ma'am. Full tactical escort to a secure medical facility, 3-vehicle convoy, counter-surveillance measures, the works." He surveyed her defensive positions with obvious appreciation. "The after-action report on this is going to be interesting. Some of these setups are definitely going into our training protocols." They began transferring Ortiz to the tactical team's specialized transport equipment. Maggie supervised every step, ensuring medical monitoring remained constant throughout the move. Her focus stayed sharp, treating this phase as critically as the actual combat had been. "Will you accompany us to the secure facility?" Chen asked as they prepared to move out. Maggie glanced at Dr. Patel, who nodded understanding. "Go with your patient," the young doctor said. "I'll cover your rounds. The other nurses can handle the regular duties." "Thank you." Maggie gathered her medical kit, now considerably depleted after the night's events. "Mr. Morton, I'll need a few days' leave to assist with the federal investigation and ensure proper medical handoff at the secure facility." The administrator nodded quickly. Of course. Take whatever time you need. We'll need to discuss your future role here eventually, but that can wait. My future role remains exactly what it has been, Maggie stated firmly. "I'm a nurse first and foremost. Tonight's events don't change that." She checked Ortiz's vital signs one final time before transport. "Though perhaps we should discuss updating the hospital's emergency response protocols. Some of these defensive measures could be adapted for general security purposes." The tactical team began their movement, maintaining professional spacing and security as they evacuated through cleared corridors. Maggie stayed close to Ortiz, monitoring his condition while remaining alert for any threats. Force of habit kept her scanning sightlines, noting cover positions, maintaining tactical awareness even in presumably secure areas. "You know they'll promote you after this," Chen commented as they moved. "Probably offer you a position with the Tactical Response Division. Your skills are too valuable to waste on routine hospital work. With respect, Agent Chen, nursing isn't routine work, Maggie replied. Every shift brings different challenges, different opportunities to help people. Tonight was unusual, but no more important than any other night saving lives in this hospital. They reached the ambulance bay, where an armored medical transport waited under heavy guard. As the tactical team secured Ortiz for the journey, Maggie took a moment to survey her hospital. The night's violence had disrupted its healing mission, brought chaos to its ordered corridors. But the building stood strong, its vital work continuing despite the intrusion. Just like its most unusual nurse, St. Michael's Memorial had proven more formidable than anyone suspected. The cartel operators had learned a costly lesson about underestimating seemingly soft targets. They would think carefully before threatening this hospital again, because now they knew behind the gentle demeanor of a senior nurse lay the steel of a Force Recon Marine, and Strike Connor still stood guard over her chosen ground. The armored medical transport moved swiftly through Phoenix's pre-dawn streets, flanked by tactical escort vehicles. Inside, Maggie maintained constant watch over Ortiz's vital signs, while staying alert for any signs of pursuit. Years of combat experience had taught her that evacuation could be the most vulnerable phase of any operation. 3 vehicles following parallel course, Captain Reynolds reported from the front, his voice crisp through the tactical communications system. Counter-surveillance team confirms they're clean. Local police providing additional coverage of our route. Maggie acknowledged the update while adjusting Ortiz's IV flow rate. The accountant had remained remarkably stable throughout the transfer, his vital signs showing only minor stress elevation. Her initial battlefield medicine assessments had proven accurate. He was stronger than his initial presentation suggested. "How far to the secure facility?" she asked, noting subtle changes in their route that suggested counter-surveillance measures being implemented. 20 minutes at current pace, Reynolds replied. Facility is prepped for immediate intake. Full. Medical staff on standby. We're taking an indirect approach to shed any potential tails. Through the transport's armored windows, Maggie caught glimpses of their police escort, subtly blocking intersections, preventing civilian traffic from getting too close to their convoy. The tactical team had clearly done this before. Their movement protocols were precise and professional. "You're very calm for someone who just survived a cartel assault," Ortiz observed quietly. "Most people would be showing more stress reaction by now." "Combat medicine teaches you to compartmentalize," Maggie replied, checking his wound dressings. "Deal with immediate threats, maintain focus on critical tasks, process the emotional response later when the situation allows." "Is that what you did after other battles? Waited until later to feel it?" Maggie's hands remained steady as she adjusted his monitoring equipment. "Sometimes later never comes. You learn to carry it with you. Use the experience to stay sharp without letting it control you." The convoy executed another practiced maneuver, changing direction smoothly to confuse any potential surveillance. Maggie approved of their tactics, professional but not obvious, maintaining medical transport protocols while implementing counter-surveillance measures. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the south," one of the escort teams reported. "Speed and spacing suggest coordinated movement." "Acknowledged," Reynolds responded. "Implementing alternate route delta. All units maintain tactical spacing." Maggie felt the transport accelerate slightly as their formation adjusted. Her mind automatically mapped their new route through the city, identifying potential ambush points and escape corridors. The Force Recon training never really left you. constant tactical awareness became as natural as breathing. "Are they coming?" "Again?" Ortiz asked, tension creeping into his voice. "Unlikely," Maggie assured him while preparing emergency medications just in case. "The cartel teams will need time to regroup, analyze their failures, develop new tactics. This is probably routine traffic that just happens to match threat patterns." She was proven correct as the approaching vehicles turned off on a side street, their movement pattern revealing them to be ordinary commuters heading to early morning shifts. Still, Maggie maintained her vigilance. Complacency got people killed. In combat medicine, the secure medical facility appeared ahead, a nondescript building that somehow managed to project both professional healthcare efficiency and serious security presence. Armed personnel maintained discreet positions around the perimeter, while medical staff waited at the receiving bay. "Beginning final approach," Reynolds announced. "All units maintain coverage. Medical team, prepare for immediate transfer." The convoy executed a textbook secure delivery, escort vehicles establishing a protective cordon while the transport backed into a reinforced receiving bay. Armed tactical operators appeared seemingly from nowhere, securing the area with practiced efficiency. Maggie supervised Ortiz's transfer to the facility's waiting medical team, ensuring all monitoring equipment and medications moved smoothly. With the patient, her sharp eyes caught minor details the receiving staff might have missed: slight irregularities in IV positioning, potential pressure points in the transport restraints. Patient presence with 2 GSWs, both surgically repaired, and showing good healing progression, she reported to the receiving physician. Vital signs stable throughout transport, maintaining consistent blood pressure and pulse ox. Last medication administration was 23 minutes ago. Full records are in the chart. The doctor, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s, absorbed the information professionally while conducting her own assessment. "Excellent field care," she noted. "You maintained critical medical support during an active tactical engagement?" "The mission doesn't change just because you're under fire," Maggie replied simply. "Patient care remains the priority, regardless of circumstances." Inside the facility, multiple layers of security became apparent: reinforced doors, surveillance systems, armed personnel maintaining protective positions while remaining unobtrusive. This was clearly a facility experienced in handling high-risk patients who needed serious medical care. Chen appeared at Maggie's side as they followed Ortiz's gurney to a specialized treatment room. "Facility is secure. Perimeter teams report. No suspicious activity. We'll maintain enhanced security protocols until the patient is stabilized and debriefing can begin." "What's the condition of the cartel operators we captured?" Maggie asked, helping transfer monitoring equipment to the facility's systems. "Being treated at a separate secure location. No life-threatening injuries, thanks to your precise shot placement. They're not talking yet, but that will change once the evidence from the hospital scene is processed." The treatment room itself was a marvel of medical security design, state-of-the-art equipment combined with subtle but serious defensive measures. Maggie approved of the layout, noting how it facilitated both patient care and protective operations. "We'll need your after-action. Report as soon as possible," Chen continued. "The tactical response teams are particularly interested in your defensive preparations. Some of those techniques could be valuable for future operations." "I'll provide full details," Maggie assured him while checking Ortiz's latest vital signs. But first I need to ensure proper medical handoff and review the facility's treatment protocols. Professional courtesy between healthcare providers takes priority. The receiving physician smiled slightly at that. Once a nurse, always a nurse, even when defending against cartel hit teams. Your reputation precedes you, Master Sergeant Connor. Or do you prefer Nurse Sullivan now? Maggie is fine, she replied, continuing her methodical patient care routine. Titles just complicate things unnecessarily. What matters is getting the job done, whether that's healing or fighting. As the facility's medical team settled into their procedures, Maggie began a detailed handoff briefing. She covered every aspect of Ortiz's care, from the moment he arrived at St. Michael's. Initial treatment, medication responses, vital sign patterns during periods of stress. The kind of detailed information that could make a critical difference in patient outcomes. Captain Reynolds joined them, his tactical team maintaining security positions throughout the facility. "Quite a night," he commented. "The stories about your close quarters combat skills didn't do you justice. Some of those defensive setups were pure genius. Hospital environments provide excellent tactical opportunities if you know how to use them," Maggie replied, while documenting final vital signs in Ortiz's chart. Lots of useful materials, complex infrastructure for movement and concealment, multiple systems that can be repurposed for defensive measures. "We'd like you to consult with our tactical training division," Reynolds continued. "Share some of those techniques, help develop protocols for defending medical facilities against this type of threat." Maggie finished her documentation before responding. "I'll help however I can, but my primary duty remains patient care at St. Michael's. Tonight was an exception, not a career change." Chen and Reynolds exchanged glances. "About that," Chen said carefully, "given your unique capabilities, various agencies are likely to express interest in utilizing your skills more formally. The FBI's tactical division could certainly benefit from your expertise." "I appreciate the interest," Maggie replied firmly, "but I chose nursing for a reason. Combat skills are useful in emergencies, but healing people is my true calling now. St. Michael's needs experienced nurses more than the FBI needs another tactical consultant." She completed her final checks of Ortiz's condition, ensuring all medications and monitoring protocols were properly transferred to the facility's systems. The accountant watched her work with continued amazement at her ability to switch seamlessly between warrior and healer roles. "Will you be all right?" he asked quietly as she prepared to leave. "The cartel knows who you are now. They don't forget people who interfere with their operations. Let them come," Maggie replied calmly. "St. Michael's is my post now, my ground. To defend. They learned tonight that hospitals aren't soft targets and that some nurses are more dangerous than they appear." As she gathered her equipment to return to her regular duties, Maggie reflected on how the night's events would change things. Her quiet anonymity was compromised, her tactical capabilities revealed. Future threats might require her to draw on those combat skills again, but that didn't change her fundamental mission. She was a nurse first, a healer who sometimes needed to be a warrior. St. Michael's Memorial was her chosen battlefield now, not for combat, but for the daily fight to save lives and ease suffering. The cartel had learned a costly lesson about underestimating seemingly gentle targets. But more importantly, they had been reminded that true warriors could be found in unexpected places, serving with different weapons, but the same deadly effectiveness. Strike Connor might have traded her, combat gear for surgical scrubs, but she remained as lethal as ever when protecting those in her care. That was a message worth sending, even if it meant sacrificing some of her carefully maintained anonymity. The night shift at St. Michael's Memorial would never be quite the same. But then again, it never had been ordinary with Maggie Sullivan standing watch. The sunrise painted Phoenix's skyline in shades of amber and gold as Maggie's transport headed back to St. Michael's Memorial. She had completed the patient handoff at the secure facility, provided initial briefings to federal tactical teams, and was finally returning to her regular duties after the longest night shift of her civilian career. "You're really going back to normal nursing duties after all this?" Chen asked from the driver's seat. He had insisted on personally escorting her back to the hospital, despite her assurances that she could manage independently. "Normal is relative," Maggie replied, watching the city wake up around them. "Every shift brings its own challenges. Sometimes it's managing multiple critical patients with limited resources. Sometimes it's defending against cartel-hit teams. The fundamental mission remains the same: protecting and caring for those who need help." The hospital looked different as they approached. Multiple police units maintained visible presence around the perimeter, while FBI evidence teams continued processing the scene. News vans had begun gathering at the edges of the property, drawn by rumors of overnight violence at a major medical center. "The story will break soon," Chen noted as they pulled into the staff parking area. "We can only contain information about a cartel assault on a hospital for so long. You might want to consider taking some time off, letting things settle down. My patients need consistency," Maggie responded, gathering her belongings. "Especially after a night like this. The best way to maintain normalcy is to stay on routine." She checked her watch. "My relief should be arriving for shift change. I need to ensure proper handoff of my regular patients." The hospital's main entrance had become a hive of activity. Administrators dealing with media inquiries, security personnel coordinating with law enforcement, staff members trying to maintain normal operations amid the chaos. Maggie bypassed it all, using her knowledge of service entrances to reach the geriatric ward without navigating the crowds. Jenny Chen was waiting at the nurses' station, along with several other staff members who had been present during the night's events. They fell silent as Maggie approached, their expressions a mixture of awe and uncertainty about how to interact with their colleague now that her true background was revealed. "Good morning," Maggie said calmly, picking up her patient charts as if this were any other shift change. "Mr. Rodriguez in 412 needs his morning medications. Mrs. Henderson in 415 had some anxiety overnight. I'd recommend having the social worker check in with her today." Her matter-of-fact professionalism seemed to break the tension. The staff began their normal shift change routine, updating each other on patient conditions and overnight events. If some of their glances toward Maggie still held traces of wonder, they at least managed to focus on their immediate medical duties. "The FBI said you used to be some kind of special forces operator," Jenny said quietly as they reviewed patient notes together. "That you're one of the most skilled close-quarters combat specialists they've ever seen." "Force Recon Marine," Maggie corrected gently. "But that was another life. Right now, Mrs. Peterson in 417 needs her dressing changed, and Mr. Collins in 420 is due for his morning physical therapy." Dr. Patel appeared, looking exhausted but determined. "The hospital board is meeting in an hour to discuss last night's events. They've requested your presence to help develop new security protocols." "I'll attend," after completing my shift handoff, Maggie replied. Patient care takes priority over administrative concerns. She continued updating charts while speaking, though they should consider implementing some basic defensive measures throughout the facility. Simple preparations can make a significant difference in emergency situations. The morning progressed with a surreal mixture of routine medical duties and continued aftermath from the night's combat. FBI agents interviewed staff members between patient rounds. Evidence technicians documented bullet holes and explosive residue, while nurses changed bandages and administered medications. Through it all, Maggie maintained her professional focus on patient care. "You really aren't going to change anything?" Jenny asked as they finished their handoff procedures. "Go back to special operations or join some federal tactical unit?" "This is my operations center now," Maggie responded, gesturing to the ward around them. Different battlefield, different weapons, but the same fundamental mission: protecting life. Sometimes that requires unusual measures, but the core purpose remains constant. The hospital board meeting proved interesting. Administrators struggled to reconcile their efficient, compassionate night nurse with the tactical operator who had converted abandoned hospital spaces into a defensive stronghold. Maggie listened patiently to their concerns before offering practical suggestions for improving facility security. Basic surveillance upgrades around critical areas, she recommended. Enhanced access control protocols, particularly during night shifts. Regular security staff training in emergency response procedures. Nothing dramatic, just sensible precautions that any major medical facility should consider. "And if there are further incidents?" the board chairman asked delicately. "Should we expect more violence from these cartel operations?" "Professional operators learn from their failures," Maggie replied honestly. "If they return, it will be with different tactics, better intelligence, more comprehensive planning, which is why improving basic security measures is essential, not to turn the hospital into a fortress, but to ensure proper protective protocols are in place." The meeting continued with detailed discussions of security upgrades and emergency response procedures. Maggie contributed when necessary, but maintained her focus on medical operations rather than tactical concerns. She had chosen nursing as her second career deliberately. The opportunity to heal rather than harm, to protect through care rather than combat. By mid-morning, she had completed all necessary briefings and documentation. Her patient handoffs were thorough as always, ensuring continuity of care despite the night's disruptions. As she prepared to finally head home, Dr. Patel found her in the staff locker room. "The hospital administration is concerned about potential media attention," the young doctor said. "They're worried about how this might affect patient confidence in our security. Then we maintain absolute professionalism," Maggie replied while changing out of her scrubs. "Focus on our medical mission, demonstrate through actions that patient care remains our highest priority. The best way to restore confidence is to continue providing excellent health care." "And if they come back?" Dr. Patel asked quietly. "The cartel operators?" "Then we deal with that situation if it arises. But we don't let the possibility distract us from our primary duties." Maggie closed her locker, her movements efficient, as always. A Force Recon Marine learns to handle threats while maintaining mission focus. The mission here is healing, not fighting. Outside, the morning sun had fully illuminated the hospital grounds. News crews remained gathered at the perimeter, hoping for details about the overnight violence. Law enforcement maintained their presence, a visible reminder that St. Michael's Memorial was now under enhanced protection. Agent Chen was waiting by Maggie's car, his expression serious. "We'll maintain surveillance for the next few days, just as a precaution. The cartel may try to retaliate once they fully process what happened here." "They're welcome to try," Maggie replied calmly. "But they should understand that this hospital remains under protection, not just from law enforcement, but from someone who has sworn oaths both as a Marine and as a nurse to defend those in her care." She drove home through familiar streets, her tactical awareness, noting potential surveillance positions and approach routes out of ingrained habit. The night's events had changed things, revealed capabilities she had hoped to keep private. But the fundamental truth remained unchanged. She was a healer who sometimes needed to be a warrior. St. Michael's Memorial was her post now, her ground to defend. Not through violence unless absolutely necessary, but through the daily dedication to preserving life and easing suffering. The cartel had learned that hospitals weren't soft targets, that some nurses carried more dangerous skills than they revealed. It was a lesson worth teaching, even if it meant sacrificing some of her carefully maintained anonymity. Because ultimately, Maggie Sullivan and Strike Connor were the same person, a professional dedicated to protecting others, whether through medical care or tactical expertise. The night shift would never be quite the same at St. Michael's Memorial. But then again, it never had been ordinary with a Force Recon Marine standing watch in nurses' scrubs. 3 days after the cartel assault on St. Michael's Memorial, Maggie Sullivan returned to her regular night shift duties. The hospital had begun implementing enhanced security measures, but otherwise maintained its normal medical operations. Only subtle changes, reinforced access controls, upgraded surveillance systems, additional security staff training, indicated that anything unusual had occurred. "Welcome back," Jenny Chen greeted her at the nurses' station. "The patients have been asking about you. I think Mr. Rodriguez missed your Shakespeare discussions." "Then we'll have to make up for lost time," Maggie replied, reviewing the patient. Charts with professional thoroughness. The familiar routine felt good after days of tactical briefings and security consultations. Federal agents maintained a discreet presence around the facility, their surveillance patterns visible to Maggie's trained eye but likely unnoticed by most staff and patients. Agent Chen had warned her that cartel retaliation remained a possibility, but she refused to let that concern interfere with her medical duties. "Any changes I should know about?" she asked Jenny while preparing for her rounds. Mrs. Henderson, in 415, had some difficult nights. Anxiety is still elevated after the incident. Mr. Collins in 420 is showing good progress with physical therapy. And we have a new admission in 414, elderly gentleman recovering from cardiac surgery. Maggie absorbed the information while gathering her medical supplies. Her movements remained efficient as always, though now her colleagues recognized the combat training that made her so precisely coordinated. Some of the staff still seemed uncertain how to interact with her, but most had settled back into normal, professional relationships. "Evening, Mr. Rodriguez," she said warmly, entering room 412. "I hear we have some Shakespeare to catch up on." The elderly teacher brightened immediately. "Nurse Maggie, they said you were involved in some excitement the other night. Something about protecting patients from dangerous men?" "Just doing my job," she replied, checking his vital signs with practiced care. Now, where were we in our discussion of King Lear? I believe you were explaining the significance of the fool's prophecies. As Rodriguez launched enthusiastically into his analysis, Maggie maintained her usual attentive bedside manner while staying tactically aware of her surroundings. The combat instincts never really left you. They just integrated into whatever role you currently served. Dr. Patel found her between patients, the young doctor's manner more confident after their shared experience during the assault. The FBI finished processing the old surgical suite, she reported. Some of their tactical specialists were extremely impressed by your defensive preparations. Hopefully, they'll never be needed again, Maggie responded while documenting patient care notes. Though the new security protocols should help prevent similar incidents, how are the staff handling the changes? Better than expected. Having you here helps. Knowing someone with your capabilities is watching over things. Dr. Patel hesitated before continuing. There are rumors that federal agencies have been trying to recruit you for tactical consulting positions. They have, Maggie acknowledged, but my place is here. St. Michael's needs experienced nurses more than the FBI needs another combat specialist. The night progressed with its usual mixture of routine care and unexpected challenges. Maggie moved between patients with professional efficiency, her enhanced situational awareness now an open secret that seemed to reassure both staff and patients. Around midnight, she noticed subtle changes in the federal surveillance patterns. Agents shifting positions, communications increasing. Her tactical instincts registered the altered security posture immediately. "Everything all right?" Jenny asked, noting Maggie's heightened alertness. "Probably nothing," she replied calmly, while continuing her charting. "But have security do an extra perimeter check, just to be thorough." Agent Chen appeared shortly after, his casual demeanor not quite concealing his tension. "We picked up some chatter," he said quietly. "Cartel elements discussing potential operations in the Phoenix area. Specifically targeting the hospital? Nothing. Oh, concrete. Could be routine surveillance, could be preparation for something more direct. Thought you should know." Maggie nodded appreciation while maintaining her focus on patient care duties. "Keep me updated. I'll adjust my rounds to maintain better coverage of vulnerable areas." The night continued without incident, but Maggie's combat awareness remained elevated. She noted small details that might escape ordinary observation. Unusual vehicle patterns in the parking structure, slight variations in security camera positioning, subtle changes in building access timing. "You're expecting them to try again," Dr. Patel observed during their nightly consultation meeting. "Professional operators don't accept failure easily," Maggie replied while reviewing treatment plans. "They'll analyze what went wrong, develop new tactics, wait for an opportunity. Standard procedure for any sophisticated organization, but you'll be ready. We'll all be ready. The new security protocols, the enhanced staff training, the improved surveillance systems, everything working together to protect our patients and our facility." Dawn approached with its usual flurry of shift change activities. Maggie completed her rounds and documentation with characteristic thoroughness, ensuring every detail of patient care was properly recorded and communicated to the incoming staff. "Quiet night," Jenny commented during handoff procedures. "Professional. Quiet," Maggie corrected gently, "the kind that comes from proper preparation and vigilance, rather than lack of activity." As she prepared to leave after her shift, Maggie performed one final security assessment of the facility. The FBI surveillance remained in place, supplemented by improved hospital security measures. St. Michael's Memorial was better protected now, though she hoped those defenses would never be truly tested again. Agent Chen was waiting in the parking structure, his presence both professional courtesy and tactical precaution. Still no specific threat indicators, he reported. But cartel assets are definitely maintaining interest in the Phoenix area. They're studying patterns, Maggie noted while securing her belongings, learning routines, identifying potential vulnerabilities, standard reconnaissance before considering another operation. You really think they'll try again after what happened last time? Professional operators learn from failure. They'll develop new tactics, find different approaches, wait for the right opportunity. She smiled slightly. But so will we. The hospital is better prepared now, more aware of potential threats. And they know I'm here. The sunrise painted the hospital in warm light as Maggie drove home, her tactical awareness noting surveillance positions and approach routes out of ingrained habit. St. Michael's Memorial looked peaceful in the morning glow, its vital work continuing despite the shadow of potential violence. She had chosen this post deliberately, trading combat operations for patient care. But sometimes protecting life required both sets of skills. The healer's touch and the warrior's expertise combined in service of a greater mission. The cartel had learned that hospitals weren't soft targets, that some nurses carried more dangerous capabilities than they revealed. It was a lesson worth teaching, even if it meant maintaining constant vigilance against future threats. Because ultimately, Maggie Sullivan and Strike Connor served the same purpose, protecting those who needed help, whether through medical care or tactical expertise. St. Michael's Memorial was her ground to defend now, her post to maintain, and any force that threatened that mission would learn why Force Recon Marines were considered the deadliest close-quarters combat specialists in the world. The uniform might have changed, but the warrior remained ready. The night shift would never be quite ordinary at St. Michael's Memorial. But then again, it never had been, with Strike Connor standing watch in nurses' scrubs, ready to heal or fight as circumstances required. Professional quiet settled over the hospital as another day began. But beneath that peaceful surface, vigilance remained, because some battles never truly ended. They just changed venues and weapons while maintaining the same fundamental purpose: protecting life, by any means necessary. The night at St. Michael's Memorial Hospital had transformed from a routine shift into a legendary tale of courage and skill. What began as a cartel assault on a seemingly vulnerable target became a masterclass in tactical warfare, delivered by a silver-haired nurse who proved that appearances can be deeply deceiving. Maggie Sullivan, known in another life as Strike Connor, had shown why Force Recon Marines were considered the elite of close-quarters combat specialists. Her unique combination of medical expertise and military training had not only saved lives but sent a powerful message. Hospitals were not soft targets, and some nurses carried far more dangerous skills than they revealed. The cartel operators learned a costly lesson about underestimating gentle appearances. They had brought violence into a place of healing, threatening patients and staff who needed protection. What they found instead was a warrior who had traded combat fatigues for surgical scrubs, but never lost her lethal effectiveness. In the end, St. Michael's Memorial remained what it had always been, a place of healing, now better protected thanks to the enhanced security measures implemented after that fateful night. And Maggie Sullivan continued her chosen mission, serving as both healer and guardian, ready to protect her patients by whatever means necessary. If you enjoyed this incredible story of courage and determination, make sure to hit subscribe to our channel for more amazing true tales of ordinary people, revealing extraordinary capabilities when circumstances demand. Tomorrow's episode will leave you absolutely speechless. You won't want to miss it. Remember to share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that true warriors can be found in the most unexpected places, serving with different weapons but the same deadly effectiveness. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next amazing story.